Yeah, the first two, the last two are kind of a subset, I guess, of the first two.
Mm-hmm.
But ransomware and funds fraud are, you know, we'll talk in a minute about the different types of coverage, first party and third party. But these are both what we consider first party. These are
Mm-hmm.
claims that the insured is going to pay out and don't, in a lot of cases, don't really affect third parties.
Okay.
And so it's probably 90% of the claims that we see, one of these two, and it varies by class. Like we do a lot of groups in the real estate sector now.
Yes.
The funds transfer fraud is such an easy exposure to manage.
Mm-hmm.
Yet a lot of times what happens is people just, anytime there's a last minute change, in a wiring instruction, you just need to call and confirm it, have a procedure in place. And so we see a lot of people just who just don't pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult. Some policies will have a restriction that there has to be a process in place. And if they don't have those restrictions, if you miss one, that's what the insurance is for. But you really shouldn't miss one. But ransomware is really the king. That the funds fraud transfer that we see on our book of business, they're usually under $1 million, because we work in that middle market space. The ransomware is the frequency on ransomware is much higher.
Mm-hmm.
And then offshoots are the unauthorized release of PI or PHI. And the other thing we see is a lot of supply chain and vendor hacks. So we've had, I'd say probably 40% of the claims we've seen, our insured didn't get directly hacked. We've seen a couple with collection agents where, they've been hired by a billing company who's been hired by, lab company, and then the collection agency gets hacked. They swim upstream to the billing company, and they swim upstream to the lab company.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen that, and there are a lot of different examples of that happen. So the supply chain and vendor hacks are also, big issue.
Yeah. And I mean, that Target famously got breached that way. Their HVAC contractor was breached, and then I think they failed to revoke like the credentials that contractor had for like a billing portal or something like that, and they just piggybacked through that. So,
one other comment on the funds transfer fraud is that there are a few ways that can happen. I mean, the most common way is, and it can be really confusing because different policies have different descriptions. Some policies say funds transfer fraud, and then they'll have a separate category for computer fraud. They'll have a separate category for social engineering, fraudulent conveyance, fraudulent instruction. So they have different, categories. So it can be really confusing based upon the policy. Basically, there are three different exposures. One is somebody gets in your machine, takes it over, sends out instructions, and nobody in the middle checks to see if those instructions are accurate. So that would be like we had one with one of our retail insurance agent clients where somebody put some spyware in a machine. It sat there for a while. Finally, somebody tapped into it. They knew by virtue of having the CEO's calendar that he was going to be out of the country during a certain period of time. So they waited till he was out of the country. They took over his credentials, sent an email to the accounts payable person, and said, "Hey, I need." I think they did two separate ones for about $60,000 each. I need $60,000 sent to this thing. It's an insurance company. Here's the wiring instructions, and I need it sent out today. And I'm not going to be available for the next 24 hours. And so that's when your funds are sent directly somewhere where they're not supposed to go. The second one is an interesting one. We call it some people call it invoice manipulation. It's basically when somebody sends out a phony, somebody gets in your system and sends out a phony invoice to one of your existing customers, and the customer pays on the invoice, that you don't get the money, and then you go back to the customer and say, "Hey, you didn't pay me. You're late in paying me. What's up?" And they said, "No, we paid you. We paid $100,000. That was required of your invoice, but it was a phony invoice." And so what happens is, the customer's going to say, well, look, we paid it. It's your issue. We paid it. So the coverage for the invoice manipulation actually reimburses the insured for the monies that are no longer collectible. And the third type that's typically covered, you get usually the banks respond is if the banks get tricked into sending funds from your account. So usually that's that's going to be a bank exposure.
Mhm.
Hope that's helpful.
No, it is, and I think when you think of funds transfer fraud, you kind of just your definition of it grows as you hear new events in the news, and that's kind of the challenge with different cyber attacks. Is like as a non-technical people, we'll tend to hear something in the news and go, "Oh, okay, well that's another thing I have to worry about." But for folks that are either on the front lines of this, like yourself, working in the cyber insurance space, or for the IT directors, the IT teams that are in this, it's almost like you can't afford to be surprised by the new style of attack. Even if it's just making something in your head, you got to at least guess at a way somebody might try to approach you, or might try to breach you, or scam you, something like that, and just try to be constantly prepared and aware of stuff. And I think we spend a lot of time talking about policy and procedure and how that needs to evolve over time with our customers. But a lot of these things are procedural, like the funds transfer fraud. If the company policy is, an amount over X dollars is to be paid out, there has to be a secondary review or a third review on it, something like that. And, that's kind of what you see is $250,000 was sent out to somebody, a fraudulent payment, but there was one person that's reviewing this. This one person is doing 1,000 things at one time.
That's
Was
correct.
anybody else looking to see, maybe Linda's in hour 10 of the day?
Mhm.
Maybe somebody should come in and just look over her shoulder and help her out on this one and make sure she's all right.